All right, so let's bang out the HTML for the expense tracker app. So I'm in my index.html file, and let's go ahead and call this expense tracker. Add our style sheet and script. All right, and then we're going to have an H2 up here at the top. And then we want a class of container. So in the container, let's put an H4 here, and we'll say your balance. And then the balance is going to go here, which is going to go in an H1 with an ID of balance. And just for the default, it's going to be $0.00. And then under the H1, we're going to have a container for the income and expense amounts. So let's create a class of inc-exp-container, so income and expense container. And we'll have a div. Inside this div, we'll put an H4. This will be our income. And then underneath that, we'll have a paragraph. And we're going to actually give this an ID of money. Let's say money dash plus. And then a class of money and another class of plus. Because the income is gonna be the plus. We're actually gonna put a plus sign here, and then let's do 0.00 as our default. And then we can copy this div down, and this is gonna be our expense, or the amount for our expense, and the ID here will be money dash minus. And then the class, it'll have a money class, but also a minus class. And then we'll just put a minus sign here. So underneath that container, the income expense container, we still want to be within the main container. We're going to have our history. So let's have an H3 here. We'll say history. And in here, we're going to have a UL with the ID of list and a class of list. And this is where whatever we add is going to display, and it's going to get generated within the JavaScript, but I'm just going to go ahead and manually add one so we can just see it and style it. So it'll either have a class of plus or minus, depending on if it's an income or an expense. This one we'll say is an expense, so it has a class of minus. We'll just say it's cash. We spent some cash. And then inside the span, we'll have minus whatever. We'll do 400. And then we also want a delete button in here. So I'm going to put a button with a class of delete-btn and just put an X in here. And again, this will get these list items will be generated from within the JavaScript, but I'm just hard coding it for now. So under the UL, let's add an H3, and let's say add new transaction. And this is going to be a form. I'm going to give it an ID of form. Can get rid of the action attribute, and inside here we're going to have a form control div, and this is going to be our text field. So let's say label for text, say text, and then for the input it's going to have an ID of text, and then for a placeholder we'll just say enter text. And then we'll have another form control, and this is going to be for the amount. So let's say label for amount, and inside the label I'm going to say amount, but I'm also just going to put a line break here, and then inside parentheses we'll say let's say negative dash expense, so put a negative number for expense, positive for income. And then under the label we'll put our input. This is going to have a type of number, and we don't need a name. The ID is going to be amount, and placeholder we'll say enter amount. Okay, and then the last thing we want under this form control is a button. I'm going to give it a class of btn, and we'll say add transaction, and we should be good. So we'll save that. Let's open it with live server, and it should look like this. So we'll just make this a little smaller. And we should be good with the HTML, so we'll close that up, and in the next video we'll start on our CSS.